here, which is our child abuse legislation package. So, Senator Cowles.
Let me get the glasses out. Good morning, everybody. I'm State Senator Rob Cowles. I want to thank you all for coming this morning. After my brief remarks, Attorney General Brad Schimel will speak on the package of bills. Over the past year, the Department of Justice, the Attorney General's office, advocacy groups, my office, Jason Guani back there, have collaborated to address several major crime issues against children and victims of sexual assault and begin to create what we call a collaborative approach to protect victims and provide them with better outcomes. I'm very pleased to introduce today what we call the Justice for Children package. This package is aimed to reform major crimes against children and victims of sexual assault in Wisconsin. In researching these crimes and collaborating with the Department of Justice and the Attorney General's office, it was very evident that something needed to be done to address the increase in cases of abuse, neglect, and sexual assault. In this package, we have put together 4 bills to aid in the fight against these various crimes. One bill reforms the neglect statutes and adds substance and clarity to current law. The bill gives prosecutors and jurors greater insight of the intent of neglect. We have also created 2 new crimes, repeated acts of neglect of the same child, and in another bill, repeated acts of physical abuse of the same child. In creating these crimes, we can give our district attorneys new tools to tackle some of the most terrible offenders against these children, and hopefully act as a deterrent going forward to abuse and neglect of these children. We've also created a bill to allow victim advocates to play a larger role in cases of sexual assault and human trafficking, both against adults and children. Through the research from our office, we have found that survivors of sexual crimes who have received services from a victim advocate have experienced better outcomes and are in less distress through such difficult and trying times. Additionally, the last bill in the package will create a more collaborative approach to identifying suspected cases of abuse and neglect by aligning law enforcement with child protective services along with our district attorneys. This approach to refer these cases to both child protective services and law enforcement will give greater investigative power and experience to identify the signs of abuse and neglect and avoid letting these criminals fall through cracks and continue their abuse. We believe it is so important to ensure that victims of such terrible crimes are protected in Wisconsin and receive justice from those who have wronged them. By aligning our district attorneys, law enforcement, victim advocates, child protective services, and our communities together, we can create a proven environment to protect the victims of these crimes and aim towards achieving greater outcomes for victims. I want to thank all those involved with these bills, especially Attorney General Schimel, my staff, Jason, Representative Heaton, Mako, Murtha, and Trinell for their work on this package of bills. With these bills, we hope we can strive to give kids a violence-free and safe childhood and deter acts of abuse, neglect, and sexual assault in our communities. We all hope that these bills can help to be a voice of change and bring the criminals preying on children to justice. Brad?
Good morning, and thank you for being here today. I would first like to thank Senator Cowles and Representatives Trinell, Mako, Murtha, and Heaton, and other legislative leaders for sponsoring the Justice for Children legislation and addressing a need to change the way abuse and neglect of children is handled in the criminal justice system. In my former lives as an assistant district attorney and district attorney, I spent the largest part of my 25-year career prosecuting sensitive crimes cases. That experience included countless child abuse and neglect cases. In that work, I saw firsthand how child abuse and neglect often do irreparable harm to children and families. Worse, the fallout from that abuse and neglect often is passed on from generation to generation. We have no higher responsibility in government than to protect our children. It's time for us to recognize the need to provide stronger tools to address these crimes. This legislation and resources we are announcing today will help Wisconsin to do the best it can to protect our children. One of the provisions provides for charging as repeated acts. For many years, Wisconsin law has given prosecutors the ability to charge repeated acts of sexual assault of a child as a single continuing offense. That tool has been critical to our success in cases involving ongoing, repetitive sexual abuse. Children often are not able to identify a specific date on which acts of sexual abuse were committed against them. I think anyone who's a parent knows that children sometimes have a hard time putting dates on when things happen. Those could be big challenges to prosecuting cases. Well, that difficulty is just as true when it comes to acts of physical abuse and neglect as it is with sexual abuse. However, under current law, prosecutors do not have the ability to charge repeated acts of physical abuse or neglect as repeated acts. Yet, physical abuse and neglect can be every bit as damaging to children as sexual abuse. It's long overdue for Wisconsin to give prosecutors the ability to charge long-term physical abuse and neglect as an ongoing course of conduct so that we can achieve justice for these child victims and prevent offenders from committing future crimes against children. This package of legislation provides an important tool to prosecutors that will enable them to address this challenge. Another aspect of the legislative package provides for dual reporting to both law enforcement and social services. The criminal justice system works best for victims when there is a collaborative approach that brings together a multidisciplinary team made up of prosecutors, law enforcement, victim advocates, and social services. Under current law, mandatory reporters must report sexual abuse, physical abuse, and neglect of a child to the county social service agency. Only as to sexual abuse of a child, however, are social service agencies required to share the report with law enforcement. Wisconsin law does not require that law enforcement be notified when physical abuse or neglect of a child is suspected. Social services and law enforcement have complementary, but not always identical interests relative to child abuse and neglect. Law enforcement has tools available to it, such as subpoenas and search warrants, that are not typically available to social service agencies when they are working alone. It makes sense that the two systems work together to investigate child abuse and neglect. It will be a force multiplier in our effort to keep children safe. In Waukesha County, where I had been a prosecutor for many years, we began conducting collaborative investigations between law enforcement and social services years ago, and I saw firsthand the benefits of that multidisciplinary approach. The legislative package also addresses neglect of children. Current Wisconsin law requires that the state prove a person who neglected a child did so intentionally. This is an oxymoron. By its nature, neglect is not intentional. This proposed legislation would remedy that confusion in our law. The proposed legislation also creates graduated penalties for varying degrees of child neglect. Under current law, a prosecutor has only two options when addressing child neglect. One is to charge a misdemeanor if the child survives the neglect. The other option is to charge a felony if the child dies as a result of the neglect. There's nothing in between. This bill provides graduated penalties for neglect based upon the severity of the injury to the child. Thus, more severe neglect can be punished more severely than the current misdemeanor offense. Another one of the bills provides for a victim to be accompanied by a victim advocate. When police conduct an investigation, the suspect has the right to have an attorney represent them. In fact, if they are in custody, police must tell them that they have the right before they may interview the suspect about the alleged crime. Further, if the suspect cannot afford an attorney, they have to be told that they can have one for free. Why would we not give a victim who's being interviewed about a crime that they did not want committed against them the right to have an advocate present to help them? And why wouldn't we inform them of that right? Further, unlike an attorney who's representing a suspect as part of an adversarial process, who doesn't have any responsibility to help the police do their investigation, the presence of a trained victim advocate can actually assist law enforcement in doing their job better. These four victim-centered bills will enable us to give children the resources they need to navigate the criminal justice system and begin the long process of healing. These tools will enable us to do the very best we can to keep our children safe. There's one other piece to what we're doing today, and these are some resources that DOJ is going to direct to this cause. Jill Karofsky is our director of the Office of Crime Victim Services. She has worked tirelessly with legislators and other victim advocates to develop this comprehensive solution to some of society's worst problems. I'm confident that the Justice for Children package of laws will be a great asset to prosecutors statewide and hold offenders more accountable than current law does. State prosecutors who specialize in child abuse and neglect prosecutions, as well as representatives from partner organizations like the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault and Children's Hospital of Wisconsin, have also provided critical assistance in developing these bills. Administrator Karofsky is here today with me to share an additional step that DOJ is taking to better serve children in our state. Jill Karofsky was a frontline prosecutor in the Dane County DA's office for 2 decades. She prosecuted countless child abuse and neglect cases. As a matter of fact, her leadership led to her appointment as a deputy DA in the Dane County DA's office, and eventually to her current position at the Department of Justice, where she leads our fantastic team of crime victim service providers statewide. I'm proud to introduce Jill as part of our team at DOJ, and she's going to introduce something we're doing at DOJ that I think is going to make a great difference for our children.
Thank you. Good morning and thank you. Thank you, Attorney Schimel. Thank you, Senator Cowles. Thank you, Representative Heaton. I'm glad that all of you are here today. I'll take credit for one thing as far as this bill package is concerned, and that's being a squeaky wheel, perhaps. But the truth of it is that this bill package was the work of so many people. It was the work of many, many prosecutors who came and talked to us about issues that they were having. It's the work of victim advocates who came and told us about how they thought they might be able to do their jobs more effectively. It was a collaboration with medical professionals, both sexual assault nurse examiners and pediatricians who have their only job is to work with children who have been abused and neglected. And we've talked to victim witness professionals. And we've talked to law enforcement and prosecutors. And it's that collaborative, multidisciplinary effort that led us to being able to have this package today. We were able to bring it to Jason and Senator Cole's office, and I told your boss that you've just been a joy to work with. Thank you. I'm really excited about the announcement that I get to make today. Thank you, Attorney General Schimel, for letting me be able to make this announcement. We're really excited because what the Wisconsin Department of Justice is going to do is to create a position at the Department of Justice of a child abuse resource prosecutor. This will be a prosecutor who will be centralized at the Department of Justice and will help DAs in every single county in this state prosecute crimes of child abuse, child neglect, and child sexual assault. Both the Attorney General and I know from experience that there's really not a more difficult case to prosecute than an abusive head trauma case of a child. We used to have this term that we'd call it shaken baby syndrome, and that term just doesn't even begin to describe the complexity of these crimes and everything that a prosecutor needs to put together and needs to understand in order to put them together. The term that we now use is abusive head trauma. And that's a much more apt term. It describes a whole array of abuse that can result in severe lifelong disabilities and even death to children. And these are some of the most violent crimes that are perpetrated against the most vulnerable people in our society, very, very young kids. These abusive head trauma cases and other serious child abuse crimes have become increasingly complicated, and they require DAs to become experts in medical terminology and in concepts. I certainly know that after I went to law school, I felt like I couldn't do math anymore. So having to have a prosecutor be able to understand these really in-depth medical terms and things that happen to these children, it takes a long, long time. They have to invest countless hours and resources to prepare and present the testimony of medical experts and to be able to cross-examine medical experts that the defense might bring forward. And the evidence varies so widely, this medical evidence is so different that it's hard for prosecutors and DA's offices to develop the expertise that they need to successfully prosecute these cases. and bring justice for victims and bring justice for their families. This resource prosecutor is going to provide our county DAs with everything from resources and advice when making charging decisions, to assisting with child trial preparation, to second chairing trials, and even taking on primary responsibility at trials in serious child abuse cases statewide. The position will not require any new resources. The Department of Justice is going to retask a current Assistant Attorney General position to take on this priority. We've had great success at the Department of Justice with similar subject matter specific prosecutors. We have a designated traffic safety resource prosecutor, and we have 2 designated violence against women resource prosecutor, one who helps prosecutors and one who helps law enforcement agencies across the state. We are very, very excited to announce the additional designated resource for a child abuse prosecutor statewide. Thank you.
You guys have any questions for anyone today?
One thing I wanted you to have this, does a victim already have a right to a child victim advocate, and the change you're making, is they inform them of this right, or are you giving them this right?
Right now, it's up to a law enforcement officer whether they're going to permit a victim advocate to accompany the victim during an interview. Right now, it's up to that officer whether they're even going to tell a victim who's come forward that such an opportunity exists. So this is creating a right for crime victims to have that victim advocate accompany them, yes. And to be informed.
Anybody else?
The provision about the progressive discipline for child neglect and abuse, there was a similar bill to that introduced last session, it looks like, and it died in committee. Is this different from that bill, or can you talk about the changes of that this year?
Well, we're aware of that bill, but at this point, I couldn't tell you exactly how it's different.
Okay.
So who will be the child abuse resource, Jill?
Well, we haven't, we'll post a position. We have some very specific ideas. We're looking for a prosecutor with experience prosecuting abusive head trauma cases. There are a handful of them in the state that could qualify to serve in this role, but we'll have to post it and do interviews.
But you're not hiring anybody new, is my understanding.
Well, we have a vacancy that we're gonna retask from some other work to do this, yeah.
You tell them I didn't announce my own appointment, though.
Yeah. Jill was not announcing her appointment. She's got a good gig.
Anybody else? Well, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.